At 72 years old, Helen Morrison had never written a single line of code in her life. But when her best friend died because of a confusing app, Helen made a decision that would shock her family, baffle the internet, and quietly save thousands of lives. This is her story. Picture this. You spent 40 years as a public librarian. 4 decades helping people find answers, fill out forms, navigate a world built on information. You know how to explain things, how to make the complicated simple, how to meet people exactly where they are. And then you retire. Helen Morrison was 71 when she turned to her library badge for the last time. Widowed 3 years earlier. Living alone in a small apartment in Cedar Falls. Fixed income. Quiet days. The kind of retirement people call well-deserved. But here's what nobody tells you about retirement. The world doesn't stop moving just because you do. Helen watched as everything shifted online. Banking, doctor's appointments, government benefits, community resources, all of it locked behind apps and websites that seemed designed to confuse anyone over 60. Her daughter, Rebecca, would visit once a month, always rushing, always on her phone, and whenever Helen asked for help with technology, she'd get the same response. "Mom, it's intuitive. Just figure it out." Intuitive. That word haunted her, because nothing about this new digital world felt intuitive to Helen, or to any of her friends. Helen had a friend named Dorothy Chun. They'd known each other for 23 years, met at the library, bonded over mystery novels and weak coffee. Dorothy was 68, lived alone, diabetic, required regular checkups at the county health clinic. In March of last year, the clinic moved all appointments to a new digital system. No more phone calls. Everything had to be scheduled through an app. Dorothy tried. God, she tried. She downloaded the app, entered her information, but the interface kept timing out. Error messages she couldn't understand. Buttons that seemed to move every time she looked away. She missed one appointment, then another. When Helen called to check on her, Dorothy laughed it off. "I'll figure it out," she said, "or I'll just wait until I feel worse and go to the emergency room." 3 weeks later, Dorothy had a diabetic crisis. By the time she made it to the hospital, irreversible damage had been done. She died 6 days later. Helen sat in Dorothy's hospital room during those final days. And Dorothy, weak but still sharp, said something that Helen would never forget. "I wasn't stupid, Helen. The world moved and I couldn't keep up. And now I'm out of time." At Dorothy's funeral, Helen counted 12 people over 60. 12 friends who lived alone, who struggled with the same systems, who were slowly being erased by a world that had decided they didn't matter anymore. That's when something shifted inside her. You need to understand, Helen Morrison was not a rebellious person. She followed rules, stayed in her lane, never made waves. But standing in that cemetery, watching them lower her friend in the ground, Helen made a decision that everyone would call crazy. She was going to build an app so simple, so clear, so forgiving that people like Dorothy would never be left behind again. There was just one problem. She had absolutely no idea how to build an app. When Helen told Rebecca her plan, her daughter actually laughed. "Mom, no offense, but you can barely use email. You want to build an app? I'll learn," Helen said. "You're 72. I'm aware." Rebecca sighed the way you sigh at a child asking to become an astronaut. "Mom, coding isn't something you just pick up. It takes years. It's for people who grew up with computers. It's not for people like me." The silence answered everything. But here's what you need to know about Helen Morrison. 40 years in a library teaches you one critical skill: how to find answers when you don't know the question yet. She started at the public library, the same one where she'd worked. There was a teenage volunteer there named Marcus, maybe 17, always wearing headphones, always typing. Helen asked him a simple question. If someone my age wanted to learn a code, where would they start? Marcus looked up, surprised anyone over 30 was asking. He shrugged. "I mean, there's free stuff online. YouTube, tutorials, Code Academy, free code camp. But it's kind of hard if you've never done it before." "How hard?" Hard. My mom tried once and gave up in 2 days." Helen smiled. "I'll take the websites." "Thank you." That night, she opened her laptop, pulled up free code camp, and stare at the first lesson like it was written in ancient Greek. Because, honestly, it might as well have been. The first month was brutal. Helen would sit at her kitchen table for 6 hours straight, trying to understand what a variable was, what a function did, why the computer kept throwing error messages that made no sense. She failed the same beginner lesson 11 times. She cried twice. Actually cried. At 72 years old, crying because she couldn't make a button change color on a practice website. But then something happened. She found an online forum for beginner coders. Anonymous usernames. People asking questions. People helping each other. Helen created an account, called herself Librarian Learner, and slowly, question by question, she started to understand. There was another user, DevMentor88, who kept answering her questions with patience she hadn't experienced since Dorothy was alive. Never condescending, never rushed, just kind. Helen didn't mention her age. DevMentor88 didn't ask. In month 2, something clicked. She built her first functional web page. Nothing fancy, just a form that actually worked. She sat back, stared at the screen, and laughed, because for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she mattered again. Month 3, Helen started designing the app in her head. Not a complicated thing, not flashy. She didn't care about being innovative. She cared about one thing. Nobody should miss a medical appointment because an app was too confusing. She called it Clear Path. Big buttons, high contrast colors, simple language, no jargon, no intuitive gestures that only made sense if you were born with a smartphone in your hand. Appointment reminders that called you if you didn't confirm. Text messages in plain English. An interface that forgave mistakes instead of punishing them. But building it was different than imagining it. She taught herself JavaScript, then React Native, then how to connect to calendar systems, how to send notifications, how to encrypt medical information. Every night, 6 hours minimum, sometimes 8. Her eyes would blur, her back would ache. Rebecca kept calling, kept suggesting she take up gardening instead. But Helen had learned something in those 40 years at the library. When you've helped enough people find their way, you recognize when you're lost. And when you're lost, you keep walking anyway. Month 7, Helen launched the first version of ClearPath. It was rough, buggy. The design wasn't pretty. She shared it in senior centers, community boards, a Facebook group for people over 65. The first week, 12 downloads. The second week, 34. People started sending messages. Small ones, quiet ones. This actually makes sense. I scheduled my appointment without calling my daughter. First time I felt like technology was made for me. Helen sat at her kitchen table, reading these messages, and something inside her that had been broken since Dorothy died started to heal. But then she got a message that changed everything. It came through the app's feedback system, from a woman named Patricia, age 71, living in Ohio. The message was simple. My husband has dementia. He kept missing his neurologist appointments because the hospital app confused him. I worked during the day and couldn't always take him. We tried everything. Then I found ClearPath. He used it himself today, scheduled his appointment, reminded himself, went alone, and came back proud. I haven't seen him proud in 2 years. I don't know who built this, but you gave him his dignity back. Thank you. Helen read it 17 times. And then she did something she hadn't done since Dorothy's funeral. She cried. But this time, it wasn't from pain. It was because she finally understood what she'd been chasing all along. Word spread quietly, the way good things spread among communities that have been overlooked. Senior centers started recommending it. Caregivers shared it. Nonprofits reached out. 6 months after launch, 15,000 users. 1 year, 83,000. Local news picked it up. 72-year-old retired librarian builds app to help seniors. The reporter asked her why she did it. Helen thought about Dorothy, about all the people who'd been told the world had moved on without them. Because, she said, I needed to prove that we still belong here. Remember DevMentor88? The person from the forum who'd helped Helen learn? Turns out, they've been following Librarian Learner's progress the whole time. When ClearPath launched, DevMentor88 sent a message. I knew you'd build something meaningful. I just didn't know it would be this important. Thank you for not giving up. Helen responded, "Thank you for teaching me. I'm 72, by the way. Probably should have mentioned that." The response came back within minutes. "I'm 19. Probably should have mentioned that too. Age is just a number. Purpose is everything." Helen stared at that message for a long time. A 19-year-old kid and a 72-year-old widow, teaching each other across a gap the world said shouldn't exist. Here's what Helen learned. She didn't learn to code to prove her daughter wrong. She didn't do it to feel young again. She didn't do it for recognition. She learned to code because when Dorothy died, a part Helen died too. The part that believed she still had something to offer. And building ClearPath wasn't about changing the world. It was about refusing to disappear from it. Because the world told her she was too old, too slow, too out of touch. But Helen realized something that everyone eventually learns if they live long enough. You don't become irrelevant when you age. You become irrelevant when you stop caring. And Helen Morrison? She never stopped caring. Today, ClearPath has over 200,000 users. It's been featured in healthcare journals, adopted by clinics in 12 states. Helen still runs it, still codes, still answers support emails herself. Rebecca apologized, actually said the words, "I was wrong, Mom." And Helen, being Helen, just smiled and said, "You weren't wrong about it being hard. You were just wrong about whether I could do it." Last month, Helen received a handwritten letter from a man in Vermont whose mother had used ClearPath to manage her cancer treatments. The letter ended with one line. "Your app didn't just help my mom keep her appointments. It helped her keep her independence." And for someone at the end of their life, independence is everything. Helen keeps that letter on her kitchen table, right next to her laptop, right where she codes every single day. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, someone thinks they're too old, too late, too far behind. And they're not. Age is not a limit. It's a library of experience waiting to be used. Helen Morrison proved that. And maybe, just maybe you can too. Hit subscribe if you believe it's never too late to matter.